All right, welcome back to the next episode of The Hard Pivot. I am delighted and thrilled and honored to be here today with Harry Ritter, the founder of Alma, a mental health care juggernaut based in New York. He wouldn't describe it that way. He's one of the most humble people I know. So everyone will have to wade through the humility that he exhibits on the call. But Harry's been a friend for, at this point, I think, almost 10 years or over 10 years. And he actually, when I was decided to fundraise for Draft Board, he was the one that introduced me to some of my investors that ended up investing. So I owe him a big debt of gratitude. And also, we're just good friends. So Harry, thrilled to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome to see you. It's awesome to spend this time together. I'll note that I'm also a very small investor in Draft Board, so excited to see this business continue to do amazing things under your leadership, and really excited to spend this time.
That crisp $20 bill is just gonna go wonders. It's gonna go far.
You're gonna give it back to me as 25. It's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be amazing.
Exactly. So Harry, you're the founder of Alma, but just if you can tell us, so again, as I've said with other guests, Harry, I know a little bit more about his story. Some guests I know nothing. Sorry, maybe just give us a bit of your background before Alma, because you do have a very interesting history, which people are not going to expect, knowing now that you're the founder of a company that's raised hundreds of millions of dollars in the tech sector. So just give us a little bit of background.
Sure. So I started out in medicine. I was a doctor, went through medical school. I did my internship in internal medicine, and I loved healthcare. I loved the idea that you could be in an industry where you were fundamentally committed to a vision of helping people live healthier, happier, more productive lives. I hadn't found my spot in medicine. And
did you went straight from college to med school?
Straight from college to med school. In fact, I skipped a year of college. So I was pretty young when I was in medical school. I graduated medical school at 25. I was doing my internal medicine. I think I was like the second youngest person in my intern class. So I think that was part of what contributed to my curiosity beyond medicine. Was I had a lot of friends at the time from college who had gone into tech, who had gone into venture, who had gone into business. So they were starting those careers. I had taken this path into medical school, learning that profession, loving, again, the mission of that profession, but there was a bug I had.
Why did you go to medical school? Was someone in your family in the medical field, or?
Yeah, I come from the classic Jewish heritage where, medical school is the equivalent of a high school diploma. There's just sort of this expectation that you'll whatever you're going to do in life, you're obviously going to start out being a doctor. So both my parents were MDs. My grandfather, who was a refugee from Poland, had come over and became a dentist. So there was a long tradition in our family of, healthcare professions, and the idea that these were professions with enormous mission, enormous nobility, that enormous job security, and so a default path. And I always loved the idea that you could help people, and this was a way you could do it that also blended a passion I had for science and for biology, chemistry, right? So it was a great combination for me.
And you never felt like pressured to do it, right? You actually wanted to do it.
No, I felt pressure to do it.
Oh, you did?
For
okay.
Sure. Yeah. There was unequivocally, I think there's a lot of listeners on this call who may have experienced this as well, right? There was unequivocally
the guilt trip.
An expectation that, yes, right, that the Jewish doctor was a great life choice. No, there was definitely pressure.
Okay. And Jewish can be replaced by any culture, right?
Of course. I mean, this is one of the things that I find so fascinating is when you get to medical school and you start to become friends with folks from all of these different cultural backgrounds, and you realize that there's this that's a theme that crosses
their mother
many
them
different.
Too.
Yes, exactly. There's support groups in medical school where it's just the parent and communal guilt support group, and it's a very wide array of folks who get to participate in that.
Nice.
One.
To clarify, so when you said intern class, what does that mean in medicine again? Because it means something totally different in the business world.
Yeah. So when you finish medical school, you're not a doctor. You have an MD, so you have the academic degree of being a doctor, but you're not licensed to practice medicine. You have to go through postgraduate training to get a license to practice medicine, and ultimately to get board certification in a particular specialty. So the first year of residency is generally referred to as your intern year, or your internship. And that's basically your first postgraduate year, where you are now technically an MD. You have an MD after your name, but you don't have a license to practice medicine. And then after that first year, you generally are able to get a license to be a licensed physician. And then you complete additional years from there to get board certified in a particular specialty, internal medicine, OBGYN, et cetera. So that's where I was in my journey. I was an MD. I finished my first year, so I was a licensed doctor who could practice medicine. I was still in the process of completing my board certification. And I had this amazing program director, this awesome, really one of the more special human beings in the world, Hassan Bazar. He was the program director at Mass General. And I remember really clearly going to him one day, and I was so nervous. I've told this story before to folks. Like I went to see him basically to say, I love medicine, but I don't really know that I'm ready to just like heads down residency fellowship. Yeah. And I was certain that he was going to yell at me, even though I'd never seen this person.
Right, because he had invested in you, right? Like he had mentored you, and yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and Mass General is a really competitive program, and they're the spots are hard to get, and I was in one of them, and I went to him, and he said to me, "Look, we're in the business of building leaders in healthcare. That can be in business, that can be in research, that can be in private practice, that can be in academics. As long as you're committed to a career of leadership in healthcare, we're here to support you. And if you go and decide to do something in business for a year or two and want to come back and do more training later, this is now your home, your family, whatever you decide to do, we're here to support you." So that was what gave me a little bit of that.
That's amazing.
So
but
yeah, that was a big launch.
It's interesting because that's maybe your first pivot, right? So what was, I do want to spend like a second on that, because that actually is kind of interesting. You're in this path for, 4 years of college, or 3 years of college, I should say, and then 4 years of medical school, and then a year of internship. And I don't know if you're applying to, or if you'd already applied to fellowships or residencies after that, but even if you had or had it, whatever, that you'd already done 8 years and however many tests and hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that you were taking on, whatever it was, whether you're dead or not dead, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? And, what was the moment, or what was the trigger when you started to think, this might not be the thing for me? And then how did it sort of roll from there into something bigger, right? Because you say, actually, I need to like vocalize this or verbalize this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I oftentimes actually take issue with the term pivot, because I think it
hit me.
It's
hit me.
Yeah, let's talk. Right, let's talk about it. Right,
let's get in there.
Because it's all about kind of how you see things in retrospect versus like prospectively. Totally. So there's this great quote that I'm not like a big quote person, but it's like my one quote that I like love. And I don't actually know the quote. I can only paraphrase it. And I think it's Emerson. So if I'm wrong, someone will tell me. But I think he says basically that if you look at the course of the best ship, it's a zigzag of many tacks. But if you view it from far enough away, it looks like a straight line.
Right.
So obviously this is before you motorized boats. So the metaphor's not perfect anymore. But if you think about the fastest ships back in the day when people sailed, right, to get from point A to point B, you didn't just move from point A to point B. You had to tack and take a course, and that was how the best ships, the fastest ships, moved. And I think that if you think about anyone's life, you're going to find all of these moments where things changed. The world changed around you. You changed on the world. Circumstances, opportunities, risks emerged as actual realities, right? All of those things that are happening constantly around us. And you have to adapt, and you have to evolve to, go back to the basics of like, what are your values? What's your mission? And what do you want to do with the next phase of your life? And use those first principles to make choices about what's best for you. And I think that's not really pivoting. I think that's evolving, right? That is the nature of evolution. The nature of evolution is you respond to external stimuli, and those stimuli cause you to make choices aligned against certain first principles that ultimately propel you further in the direction of where you want to go in life. So for me, my first principles were that, I believed in a mission statement for my life of helping people live happier, healthier lives. That mission statement resonated for me. There were certain guiding principles around innovation, entrepreneurship, ownership that were important to me. And I got to a place in my medical career where the tried and true path of, continuing on in that career as a practicing clinician no longer felt that they connected back to those first principles around mission and around values. And so, that was a moment to kind of take stock. And I think was there a moment you can remember where that brought it into the foreground for you? My experience with these things is that they're always so much easier to make sense of in a neat bow.
After the fact, right?
After the fact. Yeah. I mean, I remember being in my internship and absolutely loving it. but also being surrounded by colleagues who were so much better at what they did than I was, which was interesting. And it wasn't because I wasn't smart enough or, able to keep up academically with them. There was just a passion that they had. There was like a values alignment. There was like a guiding principles alignment to the pursuit of excellence in medicine. And Mass General, in my view, I've been part of a lot of really amazing institutions in my life. I put Mass General at the very, very top of the list of like truly exceptional institutions that promote a level of excellence that's really unusual in the world. And I saw those people and I thought, wow, I respect that so much, and it isn't me. And so it was this interesting experience to sort of be there and to see yourself surrounded by really the best of the best in that thing. And no, like, it's not because I lack some fundamental ability to be here. It's just that it's not me, right? It's not, it's not my manifestation of the mission. Right.
Yeah.
And
which is, it's a common thing that, happens in organizations all the time. When someone you hire, you're really excited about them and they don't perform and they either leave or you exit them. And then you see, and they, at their next job, they crush it. They're absolutely crushing it. And it's not that they were bad, period, or that they were a bad employee. It's that they were in the wrong environment, and it was better for them and better for you that they find the right environment, and they found it. Right. And it really is dependent on like macro and micro stuff.
I think that's so right. And you see that, by the way, even with team members in the organization over different periods of their life cycle, where someone who might be underperforming, but then is placed in a role that better caters to their skills or where the incentives are more appropriately aligned to what they're trying to accomplish, suddenly becomes amazing. And it's not like they changed. It's that the ecosystem around them changed.
Or leadership, there's a new boss or like they got elevated to a position where they can make decisions and they just have more freedom or the ability to excel.
Totally.
Okay. So you get to this point where you have this conversation, and then you knew that you wanted to go into tech or startups, or did you not know where you wanted to go?
I knew I wanted to go into business and understanding kind of the innovation side of entrepreneurship in healthcare. I had a lot of friends. So I graduated. This was 2011, 2012, right around that time. So this was right as, Facebook and some of these early tech businesses, social networks, et cetera, were like really starting to take off. And so a lot of my friends were now in entrepreneurship and starting to enter the tech space. And so that was my frame of reference. I had done 2 startups before, one in college, which was a failure, one in medical school, which was a failure, but I had loved both experiences and just like getting in there and building stuff.
So you had a taste, right? You had a taste. You like knew what was on the other side, right? It's not like grass is greener on the other side. You actually knew what the grass was like there a little bit.
I had a taste, and a taste of failure twice. So it was a particularly useful taste because it was the taste that doesn't,
the best taste,
simply,
right? Seriously.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like the promise of only upside, but the realization that you can, or you will most likely fail at what you try to accomplish in the space. So yes, that's true. And that was helpful. And I think that's actually advice I oftentimes give folks who are, in college and things like that, looking for things to do for the summer. And, I think getting those tastes is really helpful because you don't know when that taste might come back to help inform a choice you make later on down.
Right. And I think when the taste ends in failure, it's great. Actually, I'm hiring for someone right now, and I met a couple of candidates that I liked. And so I just had an idea. I was like, I emailed them. I said, let's meet up again, the ones that I wanted to take forward. And I wanted 2 things. I want to learn about you. Let's spend some time together because it's an important role. We're a small team, and this person will be working directly with me. And the second thing I said is I want to talk about failure. I want you to tell me all the reasons that this second version of DraftBoard is going to fail. And then I want you to tell me about 1 or 2 of your professional failures. And I don't want it to be one of these like, oh, I'm so perfectionist. And I'll start by saying I almost got fired from my second job, and I didn't get an internship offer from my college internship. So that's my failure, and I'll tell you more about them. But I really want to talk about failure. And I think talking about failure, and you experienced it, so you knew what you were getting into. I just think it's a really critical thing for people to be able to assess and talk about.
I think it is. And I think that one of the challenges that people who are high performing through school often have is that they have not had that experience of failure, right? If you think about, especially, those who are privileged enough to go to excellent universities, things like that, right? Oftentimes they're the people who have these sort of, really consistently fail-free records. And I think that oftentimes sets you up for failure later in a bigger way because you don't get used to it. I mean, when we fast forwarding to Alma's experience with our own transformation, I think that as we've encountered challenges in the years since, that reference point is really, really helpful to build resilience and to
know
clarify.
to know what failure feels like, and to know it's not the end of the world. It's bad, but it's not the end of the world, and it's a really important perspective.
Highs are never as high as you expect, and the lows are never as low.
Yeah. Okay, so you have this conversation with your program director. Say his name again so everyone knows it, because I think
Hassan
you were
Bazari, amazing human being.
Hassan Bazari.
Really, yeah.
Okay. And okay, so what do you do next? Because I know you ended up working with one of your friends on a startup, and that ultimately, through a circuitous route, right to Alma. But maybe just walk us through.
My route was super circuitous, right? I applied to jobs in operating roles. I applied to jobs in venture. I applied to jobs in consulting. I ended up getting a job at McKinsey and not getting jobs elsewhere. McKinsey was a great place for me. I learned a lot there. They love hiring doctors.
I was about to say that.
Yeah, I would never have gotten that job without the MD. So just to put that on the record, but it was great. I learned a lot there. I was there for about 2 years, and then left McKinsey and actually I started law school, which is for probably a longer podcast. But went to law school, and then I was
you're like every high achieving mother's like dream, like med school, McKinsey.
My joke is that I wasn't a very good doctor, so I had to become a lawyer to protect myself from the malpractice liability. But it was an interesting time. I mean, you have to remember that was back when Obamacare was just starting to become a reality, right. And I'd always had I'd always been really interested in health policy. In fact, in medical school, my research was all around medical ethics. One of the areas that I had been really interested was around stem cell medical ethics and some of these issues related to how we use stem cells and create those products. So I had always had a really interesting interest in health policy in that universe. So I could try to weave a narrative together there of why I did that. But I was there. I knew some of the founding team at Oscar Health early. They were looking for an MD to help them with some of their early medical policy development and stuff like that. And so I ended up working there for a bunch of years, which was an incredible experience. Got exposed to digital health.
How big was the team when you joined?
So I joined, it's interesting, one of actually Alma, the first employee at Alma, Nina Roth, who is still actually with us and an amazing part of the Alma team, was there before me. So she probably can keep me honest on exactly where this was. But
what number employee were you?
Yeah, exactly. I started out a few days a week. I was doing like 2 or 3 days a week with them. And I think it was back when there were like 20 or 30 employees. I remember it was during the first open enrollment. So it was before Oscar had a single member. It was in that fall period before.
Was this when like healthcare.gov just was crashing, like what was about to crash left and right? Was that
it was
the timing?
During all of that stuff.
Yeah,
it was during all of that stuff. And I remember, in January of that year when I started working with them, they were getting their first claims that they'd never processed a claim before, right? And so there were these questions about like, which MRIs
Here are these tech guys building an insurance company. They're like, what's a claim?
It was amazing, though. I think I learned so much from them. I mean, Josh and Mario and Kevin, these were entrepreneurs who really had a mission, like really believed in the mission, and had an audacity that I think has really carried them forward, each of them in their respective journeys.
Josh went on to found Thrive and seen the huge success that they've had. I don't know Mario, but maybe if you want to say
Mario's still an incredible leader at Oscar, and I think really a visionary in the work that he does. And Kevin has been through a few amazing journeys, and these are some really exceptional people who they believe in something, and then they're willing to kind of go after it with every ounce of their energy and capacity. So I learned a lot there, and then started Alma from that experience.
So you leave Oscar. Did you know you were going to start Alma? Did you?
I knew I wanted to start my own business. I knew that was really important to me. I was really passionate at the time about behavioral health. When I was at Oscar for the last year and a half or so that I was there, I really helped them build out their care delivery business. So we launched the first ever brick and mortar primary care and behavioral health practice for Oscar. And I also helped set up the virtual primary care practice that was powering their new Doctor on Demand service for Oscar members. So I had really, led a lot of the work on their care delivery business and saw through that lens, especially because we were focusing so much on mental health, the gap in the market. And so that was a problem statement that got me really excited. And I saw, one, just this massive macro tailwind that
social
media and everything else, right? I mean, even before COVID and everything else, it was, folks forget that in 2019, we were experiencing massive increases in mental health related issues, from suicide, depression.
Even before COVID, right? Well before COVID.
Before
COVID, right?
Before COVID, right? BC, I guess.
This is Jonathan Haidt's favorite
topic. Before COVID. Yeah. No, exactly. It's Jonathan Haidt 101. So I knew that that was a problem statement that got me really excited. And when I left the business and started to think about what I wanted to do next, got really excited about what it would look like to build a business in that space. But going back a little bit to my roots as a provider, I really wanted to do something that was provider centric and started with the provider experience, because my experience with healthcare has generally been that folks generally ignore the provider and think of them as an afterthought, as sort of an input, as opposed to, the end customer. And I really believe, especially in areas like mental health, where the provider-patient relationship is so fundamental to success, like that trust that you build, that therapeutic alliance that you build, that, if we could really focus on the provider experience, we could build something that was unique and special.
Okay, so now what is the original vision of Alma? Because it changes.
It's interesting.
Right? But in March 2020, there was
In May or June of 21 or 22, I don't remember when it was, but it was after COVID. We had our
depending
first.
on who you ask.
Right. We had our first company offsite. That we brought the whole team together in New York for the first time, meeting each other in person after this extended COVID remote. And I think at the time when when the pandemic hit, we were about 19, 20 employees. And at this point, we'd grown to over 100 employees. So we brought the whole group together, and I gave this presentation where I said, look, when you build a company, it's like you're writing a book, and the book has chapters. And you can actually really appreciate, as you build a company, like those chapters, right? And each chapter has different themes, different main characters, different key elements. And there's something helpful about thinking about the history of your company in that context. Like, what was the chapter? What was it about? What did you learn from it? How does it inform the next chapter? So I'm saying that because when we were going into COVID, we had completed our first chapter as a company, but it was part of the same long-term story.
Right. Your core vision is the same as it was, I think, when you started it. But the way that you deliver it is like night and day. Right? So what was the original way? Because and for context, everyone, like 2 months, 6 months, whatever it was, sometime after COVID started, and I was starting to work on Draft Board, I was asking you, who has an office space I can work in? And Harry goes, I've got 20 open offices on this floor in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And so I think that relates to this story. So what was the original vision, and how were you going to pursue this vision of mental health, by partnering with providers?
Yes. So our mission, if you think about it at the highest level, is simplifying access to high quality, affordable mental health care for everyone out there who needs it.
Yep.
And our vision for how to do that is by giving providers everything that they need to be successful in building private practices that can cater to the widest array of patients possible. So that's always stayed the same. Right. That has always stayed the same from Alma. If you go back to our original pitch deck when we weren't even called Alma, right, you'll see that same concept very clearly articulated, that we want to build a platform that helps mental health professionals build practices that can support high quality, affordable care. That's always been the same. What was different before COVID was, number one, that overwhelmingly care was delivered in person. In fact, there was a lot of stigma against virtual care in mental health. If you talk to the average clinician in 2019, they would have told you that virtual care was subpar. You couldn't create the same level of therapeutic alliance or outcome or impact through virtual care. And so overwhelmingly care was delivered in person. And that was a big problem statement. Providers struggled to access spaces to deliver that in-person care in a way that was high quality and impactful. A second critical difference pre-COVID was that in-network was by far the exception rather than the norm. You had mental health parity rules that had started under the Obama administration with the ACA that mandated mental health parity with the rest of healthcare reimbursement. But over that intervening period of time, there was essentially no progress on that front. And going into the late 2015, 2020, that span of time.
Were companies just ignoring it or kicking the can down the road? What was it?
I think that there was a fundamental break in the infrastructure needed to support the concept. And that was what we saw.
This is the mandate, and then everyone's like, but we can't deliver it. There's literally not a way for us to deliver on that mandate.
That's exactly right. If you think about insurance companies, historically have been designed to work with large provider groups on the other side. If you think about the consolidation in healthcare over the last 50 years, you've seen the aggregation of health systems. So if you live in New York City,
doctors going in-house,
there's one medical group. There's these large regional or sometimes national healthcare delivery organizations that have largely been vertically integrated systems, right? These large health systems that exist. Same thing on the payer side. And there's a way that you do enterprise sales and enterprise relationship management that is fundamentally different from the way that you do SMB sales or SMB relationship management.
Like to an independent doctor or a small group of doctors.
And our thesis was that the fundamental failure point was not a lack of demand and not a lack of supply. It was that the providers were not able to participate in the market for want of the necessary technology and infrastructure to organize and be able to participate in contracts, manage things like credentialing, eligibility checks, claim submission, right? All of the back end work that goes with
the business side of being in the mental health space. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to remember that, 90% of mental health professionals in the United States are not just small business owners. They're literally single shingle providers. They are the back office, right? And so every hour that they spend on the phone with the insurance company, checking in eligibility is an hour that they're not spending seeing another patient, spending time with their family, thinking through the care they want to deliver. And so that's
a zero-sum game, right?
Exactly. Time is zero-sum.
So you come in and you say to them, what's the initial offer?
So our initial platform was say, we're going to help you build a practice. It's going to be primarily in person and primarily cash pay, right? With the idea that we want to move towards reimbursement models over time. In fact, in our seed pitch deck, one of our slides when we presented to first round was that, we saw the ability to bring these communities of practice together as a first step towards network participation with insurance companies to facilitate in new network models. And so that was always part of the vision, but it wasn't where we could start because it wasn't where the market was. The market was providers needed access to space. They needed basic practice management tools to help them with scheduling, billing, and finding new patients. And we also saw that there was a real opportunity around community building. These were providers that were isolated from each other, practicing very much in these siloed spaces. And behavioral health providers are some of the most empathetic, kind, incredible human beings on this earth who spend their day absorbing that from their clients and responding to and supporting their clients through those journeys. And they need that support too, right? And so we saw this opportunity.
An outlet almost, right? Like some sort of like venting system. And if they can commiserate or be with other people who are in similar scenarios, it just creates the camaraderie and the ability to just maybe manage
and the opportunity for growth.
Right. Growth
and the opportunity for growth. That's how you learn, right?
Not just mitigating the downside, but also the upside, right?
Yeah. It's about supervision. It's about, hey, I had this difficult client situation today and I need someone to talk to about it to help make sure that I'm not bringing bias into my relationship because of something that exists in my life, right? And that support system is not just about satisfying, I think, that desire we all have for someone to talk to and commiserate with and have support us, but it's also about getting better, right? If you want to deliver higher quality care, it's about professional growth. Exactly right.
Okay, so you come in and literally you rent spaces. You rent, I think the space I was in, there were like 30 rooms of therapists. And the idea was,
you have to remember, when we started our company, WeWork was the most valuable privately held company in the world. Right. I remember an early meeting I had when I was at Oscar. Sometimes because you're a doctor, you get to go to these meetings you have no business going to. So I was in a meeting with Adam Newman, Josh Kushner, Mario Schlosser, the three of them. And it was like me and I think this great guy, Josh, was the chief of staff for Adam. I remember coming into this WeWork, and the WeWork headquarters in Flatiron was alive with life. I mean, I don't know if there's any of your listeners who remember that experience of going in there, but it was so vibrant. And
we've all seen the TV show. It was alive.
It was amazing. And there was this promise of network effect that I remember looking at and thinking, this doesn't make sense in this context, because I remember working out of a WeWork and I didn't really benefit from the other groups that were there. But if you applied that in medicine, that's really interesting, right? How do you bring together your primary care doctor, your
the people in
cardiologist,
WeWork don't necessarily have any shared commonalities between them, but all of a sudden you have people who are all doing mental health and they have a lot to talk about, right? Even if it's not patient specific, they have a lot to talk about.
And there are business needs that you can satisfy for that group collectively, whether it's access to technology, access to training, access to a whole swath of services. And so that to me was like interesting, because WeWork was predicated on this idea that you could bring people together into these shared spaces. Yes, the real estate business was great, but what really was going to be magical was these network effects from these entrepreneurs coming into an ecosystem.
Collision of ideas, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting as a way of essentially catalyzing what I saw as the future of healthcare. So moving away from this notion of brick and mortar, vertically integrated health systems to much more dynamic technology-based networks, right?
Right.
That's to me a much
You're
more
saying
interesting way.
The physical could actually create like an entirely new kind of sort of abstract idea of what it means to work with someone together. Like the physical
That's
space
exactly
would
right.
help, right? Okay,
And
so
it's an interesting evolution in business model. If you think about it, I love to use the metaphor of the evolution of like where people stay in hotels, right? So the old days you had sort of, individual hotels all over the place. Then you had this consolidation where the Marriotts of the world, or whatever it's called now, Bonvoy, consolidated, right? And they owned those keys, right? They actually physically owned that in a fully vertically integrated, highly capital intensive way. Then you have a business like Airbnb that comes along, which can still promise the end consumer a quality experience, a consolidated, simplified back-end experience, but is now suddenly, prompting entrepreneurship across this network that benefits from the network effects of being part of a community of
and spawns
hosts.
businesses on top of, like, there's so many businesses built on top of Airbnb right now. It just creates opportunity.
Right. So that was the original kind of concept. Now the products that we offered were physical co-working. We had a membership model that included access to technology. At that point, it was scheduling, cash pay billing, and participation in our directory for support finding patients, and access to our continuing education program and community experience, which at the time was very much in-person driven. We would do seminars and lunch and learns and meals in our spaces, and our spaces were designed, as you will remember, in Brooklyn to facilitate that kind of community building and coming together.
Right. Okay, so now let's zoom in. I remember the date, it'll be etched in my memory. Thursday, March 12th was the date New York City said, we're shutting down. No one can come into work tomorrow. Whatever you have, bring home, because we don't know. It'll be 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever, which ended up being a lot longer. Okay, so you're sitting, you've signed leases on these spaces. You've raised money from First Round and other investors, gone behind this idea. What's going through your head?
Well, it was funny. So I remember that date too very, very well. And I remember standing in the member lounge in our Midtown location. And all the providers were there.
Just so everyone understand, just so everyone doesn't miss that. He had multiple locations.
And we had two, right? We just opened our Brooklyn space. The Brooklyn space, I think if entrepreneurs are looking for the lowest ROI, use of funds ever, I think that space, was a 7-figure expenditure, and I believe generated less than $5,000 in revenue.
Wow. And look at you today.
Yeah, it was shut down, and we opened that space. Our opening party was in December of 19, right? So it was 6 weeks.
And then you have to fill it, and it's not filled on day one.
It doesn't fill on day one.
Yeah, right.
But I remember being in that Midtown space, and it was so funny. All these providers were there, and I remember some of them, and I was like, "So Monday, we're not coming back, right? Like Monday is the day." And I'm sitting there going, like, "Wow, that's not going to be a good day." I have this great graph when new employees join Alma, I take them through this like story that I was telling you about that we presented at this offsite. And there's this just
hold in my laughter because
there's this great graph I have from Looker where basically the room utilization just is flat and then just drops off to zero overnight.
I'm gonna ask you to send me that afterwards. That's amazing.
It's a very good graph. It's a great graph.
In business, and you know this, when you see a number drop to zero or rocket up, you're like, oh, it's a data problem. Like something's wrong. Check the database. Someone fat fingered something. But this wasn't a fat finger.
This was not a fat finger. This was a straight out space is closed. At the time, about 70% of our revenue came from our space. We had our membership, for our technology, scheduling, billing, etc. We had very rudimentary virtual visit capabilities at the time. And we had just launched our insurance program.
By the way, and the virtual visits, based on what you knew to be true in the space pre-COVID, was not a focus of yours, I assume, right? Because everyone was telling you, it sucks. No one does virtual visits. Clients don't want it. Therapists don't think they can do as well with it, right? Like I remember my therapist, I went across town every week to see him, and I never even thought about, I don't think I ever thought about like, let me not, go above the tunnel like into like a smoky area to his office and let me do it from my home. So it was like not even on my mind.
It wasn't part of the experience. It wasn't part of the experience. But we had launched this insurance program, which had been part of the original thesis that we wanted to bring providers together and make it easier for them to participate in the system of healthcare. And we had our first, it was less than 100 providers that were now in the process of either being credentialed or had just been credentialed. And we're now starting to deliver in-network care through this insurance program. But it was a small percentage of our overall revenue at the time.
Yep.
And I remember.
Sorry, did you think that was a game changer for you? Were you like, this is something we should do and test because at some point it'll become valuable? We're not sure when.
I always believed it was a game changer. If you go back to the original vision of Alma, I always believed that if we could build a technology platform that leveraged those network effects to create great software solutions for providers, and then figured out how through that community and network to bridge that gap to the system through insurance and other modalities.
Just so I'm clear for myself and also for listeners, the reason that you were able to do that with this payer was that you were aggregating supply. So the payer doesn't want to work with a bunch of individual therapists, and they don't want to figure out how to make it work for in-network demand on an individual basis, but you were able to say, oh, I have 100. I can come to you as one unit and we can figure this out. Is that right? Or is that a misunderstanding of it?
I think that's right. I think there's two elements of it. I think one was the quality of the experience that we could offer. So the origination for Alma's participating in network with payers was that we were offering a really great experience through these spaces and through the ways that we were creating these community of practice, right? So we're taking providers, we were putting them in spaces that employees from large midtown employers would be excited for their employees to go to. And we were supporting those providers with new technology, new learning, new education, so that they could get access to a better quality experience. Supply size, like this notion of aggregation, which I think, frankly, some folks I don't think are approaching correctly in our industry, in my view, is a necessary but not a sufficient criteria. So you do need a certain level of scale. A large employer is not going to want to invest in a solution that can only support one office in one city. Yep. So there is a scale prerequisite, but what was critical to our early success and what I think drove that original entry into insurance for us was this notion of higher quality experiences, which in the early days was in large part predicated on what it was like to come to one of our physical spaces, but was also supported by our technology, our continuing education, the ways that we approached recruiting providers, right? And obviously that's been a lot more of the approach over time as we, have not gone back to an in-person predominant approach.
Right. Okay. So you have this pilot program effectively. I don't know if it actually was or if that's what you think of it as, with 100 providers, and all of a sudden everything shuts off on the in-person side.
Well, we only had 100 providers, so it was most of the providers at that point we're doing.
Right.
Yes.
So Monday comes, no one's back in the office. Do you have a game plan at that point? Like what's going through your head? Are your investors calling you, or everyone's dealing? Probably, actually, I'm assuming everyone was dealing with their own shit, and so.
I do think you have to remember what that moment was like for the world, and New York in particular, in the United States, was the place that was really first and most significantly impacted by COVID in those first months.
Right.
So I think there was this general sense in those early weeks that everybody was hiding under a rock and kind of asking the question, like, what is this? And, what happens next? And I think that was a big challenge. I mean, if you ask me
there was genuine life and civilization uncertainty.
There was, and a lot of, there were multiple members of our team and in my family, folks who were either sick themselves or had first-degree relatives who were sick and in hospitals. And it was a very, very scary moment for all of us on a very personal level. The big question in everybody's mind was, how long does this last?
Right.
Is this a few weeks and we'll be back in our physical spaces, business as usual by the summer? Or is this a 2 or 3 year misadventure that's going to fundamentally change the fabric of society for an extended period of time?
Yep.
And I think that was really, if you ask me, the biggest challenge was, with such imperfect information and inside the fog of uncertainty that surrounded all of us at that moment, how do you approach that decision? Because that decision, that was really the gating question. If you believed, or if you chose to believe that if you chose to plan for a world that would revert back to the old days within a number of weeks or months, that would lead down one path of decisions that you make for the business.
Wait it out. Right.
Exactly. If you chose to say that the risk of that is simply too high, that's not going to happen, then that leads down the path of a whole other set of decisions. And that was really difficult because there was just such imperfect information at that moment.
Right. Do you think being a doctor helped you in that moment at all? Meaning, were you looking at papers and research coming out and making your own?
I think it was worse, Zach. I think it was worse. If there are any Alma team members that ever listen to this podcast, they will, and were around at that time.
You better be sharing it on your socials, so I hope they do.
they will remember I presented a slide to the team in February in an all hands saying, what is COVID-19? And I think it said a really bad flu. Like that was
MD,
technically
JD, McKinsey.
So no, I think that it was I don't
You
know that
didn't
it
feel like
was
you had
good or
any
bad.
unique insight. So
No.
the decision to change gears was a pure business decision. It didn't come from you had some deeper understanding this is going to be, longer here to stay because you were an MD.
I don't think I had any unique insight. In fact, like oftentimes is the case with experts, in air quotes, you sometimes are at a disadvantage.
Right. Okay. So, but nonetheless, you made a decision to make a big change in the business, right?
Well, you were asking me earlier, like, what, the specifics of it. So I remember we had a board meeting, and
Impromptu
the issue for our
or
business was that we impromptu. I think every board in the world was meeting at
right.
that time.
It was like
right?
when
We had nothing
Silicon
else
Valley
to do.
Bank was like collapsing. Like, it's like everyone get on the phone.
It was right. It was the Q1 disaster that year.
Yeah.
But we all were, so we were meeting, and I think there was a sense of urgency because our leases mandated that we pay rent every month, and those were large sums of money that needed to go out every month. And so we needed to make decisions around how to manage that liability when all of a sudden the vast majority of our revenue, which was designed to offset that liability, disappeared overnight. And this is the fundamental weakness, right, that folks have always pointed out around a WeWork type model, the mismatch between long-term liabilities and short-term assets. That, how do you manage that? And when situations like this emerge, these kind of black swan events or even
Right.
lesser versions of it. So that was the kind of early issue. And I remember that we had a board meeting. It was a bad board meeting. It was one of my worst board meetings because everybody was a little bit freaked out. Like, what are we doing? No one really knew what to do. There was sort of, should we be, doing a deeper reduction in force? How do we conserve cash? I remember, I think at the time, Sequoia likes to put out these, like, we know about the future of the world letters
Right.
from time to time.
Right.
I remember, I think there was
Buckle
a Sequoia
up, right?
letter.
Something like
yeah,
that.
there was a Sequoia letter that had come out and everybody was reading, and, the groupthink of venture was chasing after. So it was a bad meeting. We came out of it not really knowing exactly what to do. And I think there was a lot of uncertainty. And then we had another meeting 2 weeks later. It was also a disastrous meeting because I was trying to take a bottoms up approach of, okay, well, we don't know. So we'll preserve optionality. Here's what we can do in the short term to protect. But I wasn't really leading from the front to say, this is the vision. This is the opportunity. This is what we can step into. And then I remember between that second and third board meeting,
Sorry,
having this moment.
Before you go into that, it sounds like you placed the blame on yourself. I'm not trying to
Oh,
imply that. I'm just the way you're saying it. Like you said,
Yeah.
you were leading from the back. Do you, or do you give yourself a little bit of grace and say, it was a crazy time and everyone was digesting information like as fast as they could?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think of it just objectively, like it was a bad meeting, whether it was my fault or not.
No blame, it just was.
Yeah, I do think leaders.
Which, by the way,
have
harkens back to what you said earlier around stuff happens and you evolve, and stuff happens and you evolve, and stuff, like you just got to look at it rationally. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in other words, I don't know that the third meeting could have happened without the first two.
Right.
Right. There's this is to the point we talked about earlier with failure, right? Like failure is a necessary precondition of success. Right. And so I don't know that you could have gotten to the third step without the first two steps before it.
Right. Right.
But the realization to me coming out of the second one was, this is my business. I'm the founder. I'm the CEO of this company. I started this business because of a deep commitment to a vision and a mission. And I remember having this moment, I forget exactly where it was or how it was, but I thought to myself, hold on a second. Everybody is experiencing grief, experiencing anxiety, experiencing loneliness, experiencing depression, experiencing all these things more so than they ever have before. Whether that lasts for 1 day, 1 week, or 1 month. If I exist to try to accomplish those things, then let's go back to first principles again, right? First principles are providers need support in running their business. There's things that they don't necessarily know or have access to or can do on their own. What can we do for them? And that was this very clarifying moment where actually I remember Chris Davis, who was our CFO at Alma, he and I were, obviously meeting late into the night over these weeks. And the financial plan that we presented to our board after the third meeting was effectively identical to the one we presented at the end of the first meeting. So it wasn't about like the plan itself being, frankly, all that different, but it was the way that we articulated the plan to say, look, let's stop bottoms up worrying about, this and that. We will do everything we can to stem the bleeding, to protect the balance sheet, to make sure that we are appropriately funded through the opportunity in front of us. But let's get back to first principles. We're here to simplify access to high quality, affordable mental health care for everybody. Our job is to help providers in that work. What they need today is not beautiful spaces in Brooklyn and Midtown New York. What they need today is help figuring out how to do virtual care, which they've never really done before. What they need today is help figuring out how to work with insurance companies to make sure that in-network virtual care is supported through these contracts. Let's focus on that and let's double down on that. And there's no macro reason that we're not able to accomplish our mission and vision. In fact, now there's more tailwind behind the need for behavioral health. It's just the product has to evolve to meet that need.
That's a big moment, though, that part where you say, now there's more tailwind, because you go from a disaster mindset of, oh my God, we had built this thing and now it's come crashing down, to wait a second, hold on, our vision is still there. The way we deliver it is different. And it actually may be a good thing for our business and also a good thing for our customers and our users. That's like a big shift in mentality, which I think, I'm sort of Monday morning quarterbacking here, but I imagine that allowed you to then sort of go on offense and say, well, hold on, how do we take advantage of the situation in a positive way for everyone?
I think that's right. I think that the powerful message for many founders, I think, is that almost no founders start businesses that are not mission aligned against something that matters in the world. There's a big problem you're trying to fix. So because the conditions of the world change around you, it doesn't mean the problem went away, right? And actually, had the problem gone away, I should have celebrated, even if my business went to zero, right? If suddenly it was simple to access high quality, affordable mental health care because of COVID, and providers no longer needed support, yes, it would have meant that my business now needed to truly pivot, right? And that's what I think of as like that pivot.
Right.
But really what had happened was our business needed to double down.
Right. So how did you double down? So what changed? So you have that third meeting. The story, I don't know if you told me or someone else told me, was that like you all of a sudden just like figured out what tools you could build, buy, or license, and just like figured out an offering for providers that they could use from home. And then I'd also want to know, like, from the payer side, did that require you to go to the payer that you contract with originally with this 100-person pilot and say, hey, you need to cover virtual care too, or was that already covered? So those are the two things I'm most curious about.
Yeah, it was really, there were two critical elements to what we needed to do. One is we needed to make sure that our product and tools supported virtual care effectively. So that meant a dedicated sprint in our product and engineering team to really focus on our scheduling and discovery interface to make sure that it appropriately accounted for virtual care. It made clear, for example, that providers were still open for business, but virtually. And it allowed the scheduling interface to absorb virtual visits in a way that it didn't, because again, at the early outset, all of our care was really being delivered in person. So decoupling from the room booking system and making sure that that could be an effective tool for providers to manage that inflow of demand. The second thing is we need to help providers figure out how to do virtual care. And that meant not just the technology. So we started licensing a virtual interface that was HIPAA compliant, made that available to our providers as a part of our membership, but also creating training and education for providers through our community platform to help them figure out how to do virtual care. And there were a lot of really interesting elements of that. So a great example, if you were suddenly quarantined at home with your spouse and you wanted to do a therapy visit, where did you go to do the visit? Right? How did you go for a walk? Did you do it in your car? Did you do it in the bathroom? Right? There are lots of great stories in the New York Times and otherwise around how people.
By the way, and that applies not just for therapy, but doing work calls. Everyone's like, "Oh, where do I do it in the baby's room when the baby's sleeping? Do I do it in my bedroom? Do I do it in the closet where I have like a walk-in closet?" You know.
And providers needed help figuring out how to do that. Where should they go? How should they do that? How should they? What do you tell a patient before your first visit?
Right. Also, if they're in their own baby's room, now all of a sudden that's something they have to address with the client or patient. Before that they never had to because it's in their office and their space before, right?
Exactly. So that was part one. Help them get us to virtual care. The second was,
I have two questions on that. One, were you already seeing user demand for virtual visits that you were unable to fulfill early days because you didn't have this, like from the patient side, or was it more once you had it, people were like, oh, I want that, and then they started booking?
The experience of COVID, in my view, was there was like this 2 to 6 week period from March 12th through the end of April, where most people were so much in just sort of like emergency mode that actually everything slowed down. But then you started to see immediately a real uptick in web searches and landing on our website. So that was sort of the emergence of it, where people were like, okay, hold on, now I actually could really use some support here. I'm not okay.
And by the time end of April came around, were you guys ready with the bare bones of that, or you were still building it, or what? Like
close. Close. And look, at the end of the day, it's important to remember we were a tiny business. So, it wasn't like we were, fundamentally leading the industry here. We were doing what we were doing in our neck of the woods, but we were pretty early, I think, in retooling the platform to support virtual care as demand really started to pick up for those kinds of services.
And then the second thing I wanted to ask is, you mentioned you licensed like a third-party HIPAA compliant piece of video software. Now, I have a question for you. Today, do you do that yourself, or do you still have a third party? The reason I ask is, I think a lot of startups, especially engineers, and I love engineers, but they always want to build something themselves. We can build it. We can build it faster. We don't need the Ferrari. We need the Honda. But that was a probably critical decision. Like, we just need something that works right now for our needs. And so, I don't know, maybe talk about that. Was that a big subject of discussion?
It wasn't, because there was really no choice. We had to partner, right? So we worked with Zoom and we set up an enterprise relationship, which an individual provider would not have been able to do on their own. But because we were, again, this was the network effect, because we were supporting a group of providers, we were able to do that for them. We have since transitioned off and built our own. That was a transition that was not without its challenges. And frankly, one of the learning opportunities, Alma, where I think we could have done that better. But it was an important change for us because buying has limitations. There's things you can't do with a bought platform. And so now with our built platform, that allows us, I believe, to deliver a far better experience for our community with features and products that we could never have done through a third-party application.
And I think that goes to, there are certain things that are right for your business at different chapters in the book, right? And so in that chapter of the book, you needed a solution that worked. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, right? It's there, take it, get it out there. And it's so critical. I think so many people miss that.
I think you're right. You can have the perfect idea, but if you're 3 months late because you spent too much time getting to perfect, you lose the whole thing.
Okay, so you cobbled together scheduling. Sorry, there was something, you were going to go into something else. You said there was a second thing.
Well, yeah, so I said there's two parts, right? There was one is helping providers get ready to take virtual care, training, education, technology. Number two was making sure that they could be reimbursed for that care through insurance. And to the payers' credit, at that time, they did the right thing and were extremely supportive of virtual care. And so a lot of our work was not necessarily getting payers to change policy, but just acting as that conduit of information sharing so that providers could understand, yes, it's okay. There's no issue. Don't not deliver care virtually because you're worried about this issue. So offering that reassurance, and then again, offering training education. So here's how you have to submit the claim, for example, or document the visit to make sure that it's eligible for reimbursement. And so that was a lot of our job in that moment. And that's been a lot of our job, frankly, throughout the remaining years, is acting as a little bit of that translation layer between the payers who may have policies or procedures in place that make sense, but are oftentimes difficult for a provider to understand, or don't make sense and need clarification or change, and to act as a little bit of that layer to support providers in an area that historically has been really difficult for them, and one that has created a lot of...
Right. On their own, they wouldn't have been able to handle it. It would have been such a huge overhead cost for them,
exactly.
Like in terms of time and effort. Yeah. So you build this, you work with a payer. When did it start feeling like, okay, this is working, not just on like a business level, but business level plus, like you are the changing dynamics of the therapy of the mental health industry, where people are starting to feel comfortable doing these on virtual calls.
It was interesting. I think there were a lot of early indicators that there was a real there. We saw, to your comment a little bit ago, a lot more demand coming through our directory for providers delivering virtual care. We did some really interesting early survey data with providers to test attitudes towards virtual care, and we saw a pretty quick flip. I think, frankly, it was a flip that was a byproduct of necessity. If you wanted to continue to run your business and make money, you had to deliver virtual care. And then all of a sudden you started doing it and thought, well, this is kind of nice. I didn't have to put on pants today. And so, they saw that, and then they saw that their clients were actually, I remember a conversation I had with one provider who said to me, because I could see into their space during that call, and because they felt more comfortable in a way behind the wall of the camera and the screen, we were able to achieve insights about them that would have taken weeks in person. And so they were actually seeing that it was, in some instances, the other way. It was actually beneficial to have some of that distance and letting someone be in their
It's like wearing
native
sunglasses,
space.
right? It's like when people wear sunglasses, they feel, you feel less visible to the world, even though everyone sees you. But you feel like the world is dimmer to me, therefore it's sort of this reflexively, it must be dimmer to them, but that's obviously not true. And so you might feel more comfortable, but people wear masks, same thing, right? You feel more empowered to do things you wouldn't necessarily do or say things you wouldn't necessarily do, right? It's the beauty and the downside of anonymity online, right? Like you feel more empowered to say things, but it can also have downside consequences.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay.
So that was it. And we started to see those early indicators, and then, the rest was from there.
Wow. And then since then, you guys have raised a couple $100 million. Your latest round was a couple of years ago. Not a unicorn. I'm going to be careful, but close. But the business has grown phenomenally. Obviously, there's like trials and tribulations, and as you alluded to earlier, the Q1 crisis was COVID. Every quarter has a crisis.
That it
But
does.
but do you think that there's any like lessons from that particular? You don't call it a pivot. Let's say an evolution pivot, whatever you want to call it, that you take with you today, or do you view it as this was just such an anomaly and we just responded to what we needed to respond to in the moment?
I think that good organizations pivot every quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters. And some of those pivots are really public pivots. And so the world calls them a pivot from the outside in. And some of those pivots are private pivots and no one ever sees it happen, but it's fundamental. It may be a pivot you're making around culture and performance as you scale. It may be a pivot that you're making around your technology stack, where you're saying, I need to rebuild elements of our infrastructure to support the next level of scale. It may be a pivot around the suite of products and services that you're offering your customer. And those are the ones that get called pivots because those are the ones that everybody sees in the world. But all of those are fundamentally about the same thing, which is this habit that I think founders have to be in to objectively look at their business on a recurring basis and start with first principles and say, all right, my mission is my mission. My vision is my vision. Is there anything about the world that is making me think that that's no longer going to work, that there's no longer a problem statement to go after? And then you go back to your first principles around your customer need and ask the question, am I still delivering what they need today and what I anticipate they will need in the future? And do I have the resources to get there? Do I have the right people, the right infrastructure, the right technology, et cetera? And I find that, that mentality is really helpful, because what you find is that there's, frankly, in most businesses, pivots you need to take often that are actually much harder than pivots that come from COVID. The hardest pivots to make are the pivots you're not forced to make because of some exogenous factor. And those are the ones that I think, frankly, deserve even more discussion. Because those are the ones that momentum makes it really hard to actually do.
Right. Yeah, totally. Momentum inertia is incredibly powerful. It's funny. I had that conversation. I had this conversation. I've had it multiple times with other founders, and when I tell them about our pivot, I saw that the data it just wasn't working, and to me, similar to what you said earlier in the beginning. It was just obvious. We have to pivot. Like it wasn't working. Like there's no use in me spending my time or my investors' money on something that's not working. And I can't tell you how many people, founders included, who are just like, wow, I don't know if I could do that. And this is not to like pat myself on the back, but I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, just like up and change and like move in a totally different direction. Like, and to me, it doesn't make any sense. It's just like, it's not working. Move to the next thing, right? Like not to the next thing, but move to what will work or try to find something that will work. But it apparently it's not a ubiquitous thing.
Look, there's 3 categories of pivots in my view. There's pivots because it's not working. There's pivots because it's kind of working. And there's pivots because it is working. And those are successively harder. So a pivot for a company that's not working is, I think, the easiest pivot.
I agree.
Because it's not working. You're not going to start getting providers back into spaces in Midtown because there's a public health epidemic, right? So in a way, I think people are often laudatory of this, pivot that Alma took. But to your point, my other choice was to shutter the business.
Right.
Or
hope and pray.
Like,
and hopium is not a strategy.
Right. And there's numerous pivots that folks will make in the middle, which is like, it's kind of working. We're not scaling crazy, but I still believe that if I just keep at this for another year or two, those are really hard pivots. And I know, and lots of founders who find themselves in that position where the question is this just, I need to keep at it for another 3 or 6 months, or is there something fundamental about my product suite that I need to change? And by far, I think the hardest pivots are the pivots that you have to undertake when the business is doing really, really well.
Yeah.
And where you say, look, this is minting growth for me, but for whatever sets of reasons, going back to first principles, I believe the puck is going somewhere else. Yep. And I have to make some hard choices to move there. And those are the pivots that you see truly generation-defining businesses able to make. And you think about any number of the top 5, 10 businesses in the country. You think about the Apples, the Amazons, the Netflix of the world, right? Those choices that they made to pivot from perfectly great businesses, those I think are the truly remarkable pivots that I think define the very, very best of the entrepreneurs out there.
Wow, what a good way to end.
Those are the pivots I aspire to talk to you about one day in the future, right?
Amazing. One day Alma
not the ones I was forced to make,
right?
But the ones that I chose to make for our customers.
I love it. All right, let's close it up there. Harry, you want to say anything about Alma or where people can find you online? Any final thoughts about what people should know about Alma?
Sure. Well, look, we're here to help folks who need access to high quality in-network care. If you or a loved one is looking for therapy and want to find an amazing clinician who can support you and see you through your network benefit, we would love to help you in that journey. So you can go to helloalma.com, search there for provider based on where you live, the insurance you have, the things that you're looking for in care, and hopefully have a great experience getting into care quickly and having a provider who is going to really help you on that journey. So take that leap. If you're someone who's on the edge, thinking about it, struggling with something, there is great and meaningful help out there. And if we can be part of that journey, amazing. If we're not part of it, find it elsewhere. But we are at a moment in the history of the world where we need to be there for each other. We need to have those human-to-human relationships that support us in healing and growth. And so wherever you find it, I wish you and your families that journey, because it's an important one that we all need to be on.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Harry. This has been an episode of The Hard Pivot, an amazing one. Thank you all for tuning in.